Hello and welcome. My name's George. My channel is all about helping you get the most out of Logic Pro so that you can record and produce your best music in your home studio. Today, we're going to be looking at how you can create your own template so that there's no messing around when you sit down to write a song. You've got your tracks ready to go and you can start creating right away. So let's dive in. So as I just alluded to, one of the main reasons that I suggest that you have a template or a few templates for you is so that when you sit down at your DAW, at Logic, and it's time to create, that you're not just looking at an empty screen and kind of overwhelmed of where to start. When you have a template in place with some of the things that you use most frequently, you can simply dive in right away and get started and get the creative juices going. And that's just going to help you keep some momentum and keep the creativity going. So ultimately, you can start and finish a song. Now, especially if you're creating an album or a group of songs that are going to have a lot of the same instrumentation, well, then it only makes sense to get a template going. And this could also help speed up the mix process a lot. If you've already mixed a song, for example, and you kind of know the settings that you like on your voice, for example, you know the reverbs that you like, you have your compression dialed in and your EQ, well, then there's no sense in kind of starting that from scratch every time. You can just reapply the exact same effects. And of course, you can tweak them later if you want, but this at least gives you something to start on. So let me walk you through how you do this for yourself. So I'm starting with an empty Logic project here. And one of the most common things that you'll probably be using if you're a singer-songwriter is vocals, right? So let's start with an audio track. We'll set our inputs. For me, I'm just going to leave it at input 1 for now, but if you're plugged into a different input on your audio interface, make sure that's set correctly. And we'll go ahead and hit create. And we'll just start by renaming that so that that's nice and clear. And what I'm going to do is just build up a vocal chain that I would typically use. So that would include a compressor, an EQ, reverb, and perhaps some delay as well. So I'm going to start with the compressor. And if you didn't already know, there's a little shortcut here. If you click above the EQ, that's going to load up your compressor right there. And to make things easy, let's just start with a preset from the compressor. So that's found up here under default presets. We'll go to voice. And why don't we go for this natural vocal? So these settings should give you a good starting point. The one setting I would suggest that you adjust is the threshold, which is right there. And you want to adjust this to the point where you see on your meters that you're compressing around kind of -3 to -5 dB. That's kind of a nice sweet spot where we're applying some compression to the louder notes in our song, but that we're not over compressing anything. So go ahead and close our compressor. And then the next thing I would add is an EQ. And again, the little shortcut is if you just click in this little EQ box right there, that opens this up. Now EQ is going to vary quite a bit for different voices as well as the mics that you use. But one of the things I almost always do is apply a high pass filter. So that's right up here. And the reason for that is just to filter out any of the low frequencies that don't really contribute anything to the voice. It's if there's anything there at all, it's just going to be kind of low rumbling things maybe in your room the fan from your computer, for example, or air conditioning and things like that. So I'll usually filter out, at least to kind of 120 hertz. Anything below there, as far as the voice is concerned, isn't really useful to us. And once you have your own voice in here, you can actually, increase this and listen, and you'll start to hear it thin out. And when you do that, you can back away. I probably wouldn't go above 150. So anywhere from kind of 120 to 150, I would say you're safe to roll that off. If you have a really low voice, then maybe you want to stick closer to 120. Now, for the rest of the EQ, I'll just speak in general terms, because this will obviously change and be specific again to your voice. So a lot of times I will kind of scoop out a little bit of kind of the lower mids right here. That sometimes you get a little bit of muddiness happening there. So I just kind of scoop that out a little bit. And then usually kind of in this range, higher mid range, is usually kind of where I find the most kind of pleasing part of the voice. So I'll usually kind of scan around here. And once I find that, I'll give that a little boost as well. And that'll just help the vocal kind of cut through the rest of the instruments. And then lastly, I'll usually do a little bit of a high shelf there as well. And again, that's just going to introduce some more high-end information. So kind of some air, if you will, and just let things kind of cut through a little bit more. So that's kind of a typical EQ that I would use on the voice. But of course, use your ears and adjust where necessary. So we'll go ahead and close our EQ. And then the next thing is reverb. So I'm going to set my reverb up on my sends. So right now we don't have any sends set up. So I'm going to click here, go to bus 1. And you'll notice this changed to aux 1. And I'm just going to open up my mixer so that you can see that a little bit more clearly visually. So the mixer you can open up with the letter X on your typing keyboard. So now you can see aux 1 here, bus 1. So let's rename this. And I'm going to call this short verb. I'm going to have a short reverb as well as a longer reverb that I'll add in a minute. So on our track here, we'll go down to our reverb and let's go to the space designer. If we go up to our presets here, you'll notice they're arranged small, medium, large. Actually, I'm going to go medium. And let's go to the plate reverb. I kind of like this blue plate myself. And I'm going to increase the wet signal all the way to 0. So that'll give us full wet signal on our reverb bus and none of the dry signal, which is what we want. So we can go ahead and close this. And I'll just add a little bit there using my send. But of course, once we get our vocal in there, then you'll want to adjust that to taste as well. And then I'm going to repeat that process. I'll make a second bus 2. And I'll call this long verb. And let's create another space designer. And for this one, I'll go to presets again. I'm going to go to large spaces. And I'm going to use a hall for this. Why don't we go warm vocal hall? So you notice here it's 3.3 seconds, whereas our blue plate, I believe, was 1.7. So again, I'm going to increase the wet signal all the way up, keep the dry signal all the way down. And now this longer reverb is going to linger quite a bit more. So I'll probably have that less than my medium reverb. One other thing I like to add for vocals that I work on is usually a stereo delay. Not everyone might like delay, but I'll add one and you can choose to use it or not. So I'm going to go to bus 3. I'll rename this ST delay for stereo delay. And let's go here to our delay, stereo delay. Now for vocal, I usually like to bring the feedback down. So the feedback is going to affect how many repeats you get in your delay. So how many times the word reappears. If you have a big feedback, you're going to get a lot of repeats. So I'm just going to do a short feedback. Here I like to adjust this low cut just so I'm not delaying the lower frequencies. And then we have a left delay and a right delay. So we have 2 different settings for each side. And I usually like doing kind of 1/8 notes in one side, and I'll usually do 16ths in the other. And we can close this and we'll apply a little bit of that. So there's our basic vocal chain all done and ready to go. And now we can look at adding some other tracks as well. Now the common track a lot of people will be using is guitar, both acoustic and electric. Why don't we start with an acoustic track? So that'll be another audio track. So I'll just go up to the plus button here. And for acoustic, you'll either be using 1 or 2 microphones. So that'll depend how you're using your inputs, right? So if we're doing just 1 microphone, you'll just have the 1 input. If we're doing 2 microphones, you can choose to use a stereo track. So input 1 and 2, 3 and 4, and so on. I'm going to assume we're going to use 2 microphones, so I'm going to go input 1 and 2. Now, I'll just mention when you're using a stereo track with 2 mics, you want to make sure that you have your gain on your preamp balanced between the 2 microphones so that one side's not louder than the other. For this reason, sometimes I like actually having 2 mono tracks. So instead of having stereo track with input 1 and 2, I would have a left and right track for my acoustic guitar, one set to input 1, one set to input 2. And the reason for that is if I need to adjust the volume of, say, the left against the right, I can do that, right? I can just bring down the left side and adjust the right so that they both match. The downside to that is now we're working with 2 tracks instead of 1. So when it comes to editing, we would have to group the 2 tracks together so that they edit the same way. So when we make a cut to one, it'll make a cut to the other. But for simplicity's sake, if you can get your gain matched, then using a stereo track just makes things a little bit easier. So let's rename this acoustic guitar. Now for the acoustic guitar, I'll show you a little shortcut that you can explore. And that's if you go to your library, which is found up here, or you can hit the letter Y on your keyboard. And now if we go to acoustic guitar, for example, now we have all these different channel presets that come bundled with Logic Pro. So for example, let's try this natural stereo. Click on that. And now you'll notice it loaded in a bunch of different plugins already. So now we have our EQ. We have a compressor, but it's currently bypassed. It's grayed out. We can turn that on with the little on button right there. There's a second EQ. The stereo spread, which is also grayed out, and a stereo delay. And then it also added 2 reverb buses as well, 5 and 6. Now, if you prefer, you can go about it the same way that we did with our vocals and just start completely from scratch. The one thing that I don't always like about these presets is it adds in kind of new buses. So for example, it added in 2 more reverbs where we already had our reverbs that we had for our vocal. So we could just reuse our vocal reverbs without adding kind of these more buses. I'm just going to undo that, and I'll quickly just add in a compressor, and we can look at our presets for our guitars. There's an acoustic guitar preset ready to go there. And again, I would just adjust the threshold to the -3 to -5 when we're recording our guitar. And then we can add an EQ as well. And let's just explore some guitar presets. Acoustic guitar bright. Let's just try this acoustic rhythm guitar. You can see it actually looks quite similar to what we had for our vocal EQ as well. We can close this. And as I mentioned, now we can reuse the reverbs that we had already set up. So we can go to bus 1, add a little bit of the short reverb, and bus 2, just a little bit of that longer reverb. And delay, I don't usually use delay on acoustic guitars. Now, why don't we add an electric guitar as well? And for the electric guitar, that's generally going to be mono. So let's hit create. We'll rename this electric guitar. Now we can record our electric guitar 2 different ways. We could either mic an amplifier, or we could plug directly into our audio interface and use some of Logic's built-in amps. So why don't we look at that? So if we go here to Amp Designer, here we've got Logic Pro's built-in amp simulators, and we go to our presets here. We have a whole bunch of different presets that we can check out. Let's try Original Nashville. And you can also switch all the different models that we have here, the amp, the cabinet. You can even change the different mic, for example. So we're on 57, and we can change the mic position too. So a lot of things we can customize. And of course, all the EQ and reverb we can tweak as well. And then in addition to the amp, you can also add some pedals. So you have either individual pedals here under the stomp boxes, or if you go to pedal board, and we could go mono to stereo. So if there's any stereo effects in the pedal board, we'll take full advantage of that. And here you can see all the different pedals that we have available to us. So if there's, if you want a fuzz pedal, for example, you can throw that in there, and anything else that you might want. Tremolo, for example. So as far as effects for the guitar, there's a lot of effects built in right here. But you can, of course, if you want to add a little bit of that reverb that we had, we can add a little bit of that here as well. So we'll do our short and our long. And delays, that's something that on electric guitar I do find using a lot. So we can add a little bit of that too. And of course, we can mute those if we want at any point. Now, another common instrument you'd probably have is bass. And we could either, if you're a bass player, you could record that in using an audio track. And there's also the virtual bass amp, the same way as we have the guitar amps. Or if you're not a bass player, you can choose to either use the session bass player, or you could use the studio bass, which is found under studio instruments right here, and play it in using your MIDI keyboard. I'm going to give the studio bass a try. So let's go create there, and we can rename this bass. And let's go ahead and open this up, and we have 6 different basses that we can audition. And we'll stick with the modern bass there. And generally speaking, for bass, don't have any reverb or delay. We could add a little bit of compression. So we go to the bass presets are actually found under guitar. Let's do the E bass there. And we could do a little bit of EQ as well. And for bass, we certainly don't want to be rolling off any of those bass frequencies unless they're really overbearing. For now, I would just leave the bass blank, and then you can adjust as necessary. You shouldn't need anything too drastic here. Now, another one we probably want is piano. So let's go ahead and add another software instrument. And this time we'll choose the studio piano. And let's go ahead and open this up. And with the piano, we have 3 different pianos to choose from. There's 2 versions of the Studio Grand, a 1 mic or a 3 mic version. If you're going for more of a vintage sound, you can check out the upright piano, but I quite like the Studio Grand, so I'm going to go with that. Now for the piano, we can have a little bit of compression there. So let's check out under keyboards. Here we go, piano. Let's do that. And we'll adjust our threshold as necessary. And we can have a little bit of EQ as well. Let's see if there's grand piano EQ. We could give that a try as well. If I have kind of a full mix with bass and everything, then I'll usually roll off a little bit of the piano. But if the piano is the main feature, if it's a piano and vocal or something like that, then I will leave that high pass off to make sure that the piano is taking care of the bass. And the piano, we can have a little bit of reverb for the piano. That's always nice. So let's do a little bit there. And of course, let's rename this piano. And then the last of the kind of core instruments would be adding some drums. And for this, why don't we go ahead and use one of the session drummers. And let's go with the pop songwriter, since that's kind of the vibe we're going with. Go ahead and hit create. And that'll give us a little loop to get started, and we can add or extend this as we wish. Now with the drummer, one thing I'll show quickly that I like to do is in your library, and again, if you're not seeing this, just hit the letter Y on your keyboard. That'll open and close that. If you go down to multi-channel kits, right now you'll notice that there's just the 1 track here. So we don't have control over the volume of the individual drum kit pieces. However, if we go to the multi-channel kit, and we can select Bluebird, which is the same kit we currently have. And now, you notice this little arrow here. We have all the different instruments and mics associated with it available to us. So if we open up our mixer in X, here you see we can adjust kick in, kick out, snare top, snare bottom, hi-hat, and so on and so on. So now we have full control over that drum kit. And to simplify things, we can easily collapse this, and kind of we're back to having just the main fader for our drum kit. So now we have all of our main tracks ready to go. Now I'll just do the last couple things just to tidy this up a little bit more. If we wanted to pretty this up a little bit, we could change the icons just to make everything kind of a bit more visually appealing. So on the piano right here, we could simply right click, and we can go up to keyboards, select our grand piano, and similarly with bass, just right click, bass, and electric guitar will do the same, acoustic guitar, and lastly, our vocal And for my own sake, for whatever reason, I like having the drums at the top, and then my bass, and then my guitars, piano, and vocals last. Of course, you can order these however you'd like. Now, the last thing that you might want to consider doing is just adding some markers in here. So if we go to our global tracks where it says show and hide, here's our markers, and I'll just hit the plus button to create a marker. And if you have kind of a song structure that you follow regularly, then you can do that. So for example, we have an intro for 4 bars, maybe a verse for 8, a pre-chorus for 4, a chorus for 8, and so on and so on. And then I like to color code these as well. So we can go to option C, that brings our color palette up. And I like to color all my verses the same, all my pre-choruses the same, all my choruses the same, and our bridge. And then now we have kind of a song structure that we can follow to. And of course, we can rearrange these and delete and move them as necessary. But at least this gives us a little starting point. Now, as a little bonus, let's say you already have a track that you've completed and mixed, and you really like the settings you have from there, and you want to incorporate those into your template. Well, then you can easily import those settings into your new session. So for that, you just go to File, Import, and then go to Logic Projects. Go find the project, select Import, and if you have different project alternatives, you want to select the correct alternative and go OK. And now, for example, if I liked the vocal I had in there, I want to select all the plugins of that track. And if you have any sends, you want to select those as well. And then just click Add. It'll ask you if you want to add the different sends. Usually I select Add All. And now I have all my plugins from that other session, as well as all the sends that I had set up. So this way you can bring in your settings from some other sessions and create your template that way. Now, the last thing you might want to consider adding to your template is a mastering chain. So if you're in Logic 11, we have the mastering assistant, which makes things really easy that you can add at the end. Or if you go here under settings, we have all these different presets right here. So for example, if I just go ahead and select basic, this will add in a compressor, an EQ, the multipressor, exciter, direction mixer, and the limiter. I won't go deep into mastering here because I have a couple of dedicated videos on those, which I'll link to. But once you have mastering chain that you like, you can, of course, apply that to your template as well so that that's ready to go too. I would, however, caution that having lots of plugins on your master bus here can sometimes introduce quite a bit of latency. So you might want to consider having those muted or bypassed when you're recording. And then when you're in the mixing stage, then you can start reintroducing those. And now the last thing we want to do is actually save this session as a template. So you go up to File, Save as Template. We can name this Songwriter Template. And then now, whenever we go New from Template, if you go to My Templates, now you'll see your Songwriter template ready to go. And you're ready to create right away. So I hope you found that helpful. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave those in the comments below. And if you want to download my own Songwriter template just like this, make sure to download my free Logic Pro Ultimate Starter Pack. This includes my Logic Pro session templates, my audio recording guide, my mixing guide, my hotkey cheat sheet, and my gear guide. I hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you in the next one.